Hello everyone, and welcome to a tutorial for Unreal Engine 4. In this tutorial, I'm going to show you how to make an interaction system, and I'm also going to go in depth on some of the nodes that I'll be using, so the newcomers that are new to Blueprints can learn some new things. For those wondering, I'm going to be starting with a first-person template, and I'll be using 4.24 as the version, so if you want to follow along one-to-one, then you can use that version, but honestly, this should work for past versions and future versions as well, since this hasn't really changed at all in the past versions. It's basically been the exact same thing. So yeah, let's get right into it. The very first thing that I'm going to start doing here is opening up 4.24 and starting up a new project, opening up the first person template. And I'm also going to be adding in the starter content so then you guys can follow along with the same meshes that are included in the starter content. I'm planning on making another tutorial after this going through doors, but for this tutorial, we're going to be just going through turning on lights using buttons and stuff. Now, since there's some stuff in the first person template that I don't really care about, I'm going to be removing it. Things like the firing projectiles and just a whole bunch of other stuff in terms of like the headset stuff, just VR things that are just completely irrelevant to what we need. So if you want to do that as well, you can. I'm going to just be cleaning that stuff up. Since it's unnecessary for this tutorial. So the very first thing we're going to want to do is go up top left, go to edit, and we're going to want to go to project settings and then go down to input. A lot of you should already know about this, but in the input area, you can put in action mappings, name things. You can also do axis things, which is primarily for looking up, looking left, right, all that kind of stuff. But we're going to specifically focus on action mappings since we want a press and release kind of system. We're going to go on ahead and call it interact, and we're also going to set a key on it. And by doing that, you could just press the plus right next to the name that you just set, and that should allow you to add a action mapping. I'm going to set it as E, but you can do any sort of key that you want there. Additionally, on top of cleaning everything, I'm also deleting all these random action mappings that get added onto UE4. I have no idea why this happens. It almost looks like they're Fortnite keys or something. You can delete all those. I still don't even know how to do it. I've been using this program for like 5 years and I don't even know what this is. So now that we have the interact key, we can now go ahead and save all, compile our blueprint just in case, so then everything is working properly. And we're going to go on ahead and add our event interact. Now, whenever we press the E key, we can actually start listening for actions and start doing things wherever we want to on the press and release. The first thing we're going to do is we're going to make a line trace system. And this basically allows us to shoot a trace forward that's going to check for any sort of objects in front of us that we'll be able to interact with. And I'll go more in depth on how you can do that just in a few minutes. We're going to go on ahead and drag the first person camera from up top, which is one of our components. And then we're going to get the world location, which is essentially the, location of the camera in the world. We're going to slap that into the start, which basically means our line trace is going to start from the camera since we're doing a first person game. And then from there, we're going to do a get actor or get forward vector, which essentially means that we're just getting the forward direction of our camera. And then we're multiplying it by 500, which is a distance. And that basically means we're multiplying it 500 units forward. And then from there, we're going to add the original location on top of that, because since we're doing a get forward vector, that's not a world location, that's just a direction vector. So it could be something like 0, 0, 1, or something along those lines rather than our world location. You can also find a tutorial down below that I'm going to link, which is a great resource. He has a lot of videos going through specific nodes and stuff, and he kind of goes through more of the details on get forward vector. It's relatively straightforward, and once you get the hang of it, you'll understand the basics of it. But this is a super simple line trace system that I'm also going to link to the UE4 documentation, because they essentially have the exact same thing as well in there, and that should hopefully help you out even further. Just so we can start testing things, I'm going to make it so we draw a line by setting for duration on the debug draw debug type section. This basically allows us to test if the line trace is going where we want it to. And this is a perfect thing that you should be doing, or should be using as much as you can, because then you can start debugging your game and making sure things are working. Then I'm adding object types, and basically we want to add the world static to make sure that we're not interacting with objects through walls. But we also want a very specific collision type that we're going to create called interactable. And to do that, we're going to go back to the project settings, and then we're going to go down under engine, and we're going to select collision. Under collision, we're going to make a new object channel, which basically means we can specify a kind of an object channel rather than having projectile or pawn or physics objects. We can specify things that are going to be interactable. That way, that's separated from any of your other systems in the game. Something you should be careful about is setting your default response to ignore, because we are going to be very selective as to where we put this. What this basically means is whenever you create a new object, the default response for interactable isn't going to be block, it's going to be ignore. That's why that way you can specifically select what things are going to be interactable, especially when you're making items or doors or anything like that that you want to interact with, when otherwise you don't want that interactable on things like walls or anything that's going to be in the way, like crates. Well, unless you want to make crates interactable, which then by all means go for it. Then we're going to go on ahead and compile the third-person character or your character blueprint. That way you can actually start seeing that new collision type that we made, and then we're going to select it as the third one. Then let's go on ahead and test it out, see if it's working. Looks like it's working pretty well. I noticed one issue where the crosshair wasn't actually in the center for some odd reason, so I went ahead and just fixed that really quickly. Now that we've got that going, we're going to create something called a blueprint interface, and you can do that by right-clicking into your content browser, going down to blueprints, and then going down to blueprint interface. What this basically means is you can create some sort of node or collection of nodes that can be interacted with or sent message to if there is an actor that actually includes the interface. And I'm going to show you how to include an interface in actors. So we're going to go on ahead and call it BPI_interaction. You can call it anything you like. I call it BPI because it's a blueprint interface. Then we're going to open that up and we're going to edit the first function in there, and we're going to call it interact with object. Compile that, save it, and well, that's basically it. We're going to move on and go back to the first person character so then we can start interacting with objects. To start, we're going to drag out of the out hit, break hit result, and then we're going to do a branch out of the blocking hit. And this is kind of like a safety barrier to make sure that we're not interacting with things that we don't want to interact with. And then out of the hit actor, we're going to use a node called does implement interface. And this basically means it's going to check if that interface is included, the BPI_interaction, or whatever you might have called it earlier. Then we're going to branch it, check if it's true or false, and drag that back into the blocking hit branch. You could probably use an AND boolean in here, but I chose not to just for safety. But you really could. It's just this time around I didn't. Yeah, that's really up to you. I think both ways would work, but in this instance, that's fine. Then I'm going to go on ahead and drag out of the hit actor and type in reroute. This is great for organizing our blueprint nodes. And then we're going to do a message, interact with object, or whatever you might have called the function in your interface. Now, what this basically means is whatever the event is for interact with object inside of your actor or whatever is hit, it's basically going to call whatever event is happening in that object. So let's say you want to fire off a firework on a specific object that's firework and has the event in there. You can do that, and then you can have doors that do different things. So that's what the interact with object message is essentially doing. So from here on out, we're going to create our button and light actors. And essentially what's going to happen is our button is going to interact with the light. It's kind of complex. So the player is going to interact with the button, and the button is going to interact with the light. That way we kind of have a remote button rather than directly pressing the light. And I'm going to show you how to do that. And it's very simple, actually. So let's go on ahead and call this BP_light button, keeping up with the style guide, and we're going to add a static mesh on this. And because we don't have a button in here, I'm going to just use a table because it looks like a button. Let's go on ahead and scale that down so it's not enormous, and then we're going to rotate it so then we can place it on the wall. We're going to quickly slap that in the world, and look at that. Well, it's inside of the wall, but let's rotate it, and look at that. It's beautiful. It's a button. Yeah, let's go on ahead and check it out, make sure that the scale is right. Yeah, it feels pretty right. I think that's a button. And then from there, we're going to go on ahead and add a box collision to our light. And this is basically going to use that collision that we just made, that interactable collision response. Make sure you're scaling it so it's fitting the entire button. You don't want a box collider that's not reaching the entire spot, because then gamers are going to be very upset. So make sure you do that properly. And from here, I'm going to scroll down and I'm going to go to the collision section and kind of go to the collision presets. And we're going to do this custom because we need to change things to our liking. So what we're going to do is we're going to set everything to ignore, but the interactable that we have, that is down at the bottom of the object responses. That way, whenever we do a line trace, it's only going to hit anything that has interactable. Of course, it's hitting world static and world dynamic objects, but that's just in case we're not interacting with things through walls. In this case, we want to only use interactable. Now we're going to go to class settings at the very top, and we're going to implement that interface in the actor. And by doing that, you can add, then select your interface. We have BPI_interaction, compile the blueprint, and that's literally it. Now we can start working and start adding in events so then we can interact with this object. So let's go to the event graph. We're going to delete everything that we don't need in here. And then we're going to go ahead and add event interact with object. And like I showed you before, what this basically means is anytime we send a message to this actor, which is the interact with object message, it's going to call this event, which is great because that means we can reuse this everywhere without having to create more and more event or custom events and call that through the line trace. It makes things really neat. And you can do this for a whole range of stuff, like, making a generator, or in our instance, turning on a light, because that's super interesting. So we have our event interact with object. I'm also going to go on ahead and create a variable, and that variable is going to be our light actor, or essentially our actual light. And what we're going to do is we're interacting with the button, which is then going to interact with the light. And the light doesn't have any collision responses, which means we can't interact with it with our line trace, which is great. We don't want to be able to manually turn on the light unless that's what you want. In our instance, we want a button that does it for us because we're fancy. So we're going to add in that variable down at the bottom left on the plus button. And then what we're going to do is we're going to do something called instance editable. What that basically means is every instance of this button in the world, we can edit it and do different things with it. That means, let's say you want one button that interacts with light A, and then you want button B that interacts with light B. You can do that, and they're not all the same thing. This is also great because now we can actually start picking certain objects inside of the world. Let's go on ahead and create our actual light so we can start interacting with it, turning it on and off. I'm gonna go on ahead and call it BP_toggle light, I guess. I honestly don't even know how to name things anymore. And we're gonna add a static mesh again, and this is going to be our lamp. I'm choosing the wall lamp for this rather than the ceiling lamp because the ceiling lamp is too big and I don't want to deal with it. So let's add that in. Looks great. Looks like a yellow light. And now we're also going to add a spotlight so then we can actually, have light coming out of it. Now, don't do what I'm doing. My light was clipping in the wall. So you just have to move it a little bit outwards. That way it's not clipping inside of the wall and you have actual light coming out. I'm going to make sure I put that right above the button. That way, when I create a second set of buttons to kind of show you the instance editable, then we can do that. So here I am changing a couple values, things like the intensity, the outer rim or whatever size and all that kind of fun stuff for the light, just to make it look fancy. You don't really need to focus on this at all. And then the same process like the button, we're going to go back to the class settings and we're going to add the interaction interface to the light. Then we're going to do an event interact with object, and we're going to use something called a flip-flop. And basically what a flip-flop is, it kind of holds a local Boolean inside of it. And every time you call it, it's going to switch that Boolean, which is a true or false statement, and it's going to flip-flop it and kind of play the execution. In this case, we only really care about the Boolean, which is A. We're going to use both execution lines, so then that way it's always activating. And then in is A, we're going to do a select. This basically means anytime we're doing A or B, or true or false, it is essentially going to give us a false or true value. So is it on or is it off? We're going to make sure that the false is 0 and the true is 1500. That basically means whenever it's false, which is B, it's going to be 1500. And whenever it's A, it's going to give us the actual intensity of our lamp and actually turn it on. Then we're going to go back to our button, and what we're going to do is we're going to drag off the attached light, get it, and then we're going to do what we're going to do just for safety to make sure that we're not interacting with something that's null, just in case, is we're going to do a validated get. And you can do that by right-clicking on the variable and then doing switch to validated get. I think it's near the bottom. And then we're going to drag off the attached light variable node and do interact with objects. So if you're kind of understanding what's going on, is we're kind of creating a electronic line or Wi-Fi or some 5G, where we're having a button that's going to be interactable. The character interacts with the button, and then the button is going to interact with the light. And it's kind of like a little relationship that we're having. So now that we've got that going, we should be able to start pressing the light and getting it to work. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to duplicate this light so I can kind of show you the instance editable system. Now, we're going to go down and we're going to select our button B, which is the second button that you duplicated. And you can duplicate by doing Control-C, Control-V. We're going to press that eyedropper, or the color dropper, and select the light above it. Then we're going to do the same with light A and light button A, or whatever you want to call it. From there, we can actually start, play, and actually start pressing the button. I did a little oopsie and forgot to set the light to a default of 0. So that's just the problem. That's the flip-flop. That's the flip-flop going from B to A, and it just doesn't understand that it's turned on. So what you can do to fix that is to set the default intensity of the light by selecting it inside of the components and just setting it to 0, and then we're all good to go. That's our light system. And you can do even more with this, not just turning on lights. You can even turn on a whole array of lights by using an array of objects inside of the button. There's a lot of things you can do with this, which is super awesome. Things like being able to interact with objects like items and being able to pick them up, being able to open doors, like I said before. There's a whole array of things. The sky is the limit, I think is what they say. In the next tutorial, I'm going to go through things like a interface that'll pop up whenever you hover over things, and potentially even being able to turn on multiple lights, and also a door. So stay tuned for that. If you really enjoyed this, and I hope it helped you, like and subscribe. I also have some courses coming up in the near future as well, kind of going through the entire process of creating games in Unreal and also modeling things in Blender. If you have anything that you need help with, let me know down in the comments, and I'll try to get to it as soon as I can. I'm here to help. And, well, at some point I want to get some courses going, some full courses, and they will obviously cost a little bit, but I'm going to make sure that they're worth the buck. Thanks for watching. I'll see you later. Have a fantastic day.